Hello everyone, this is Two-Tailed Fox here, welcoming you back to another chapter of Sontails' Dreams Come True. Sorry it's been a while, I've just been doing a couple things. But anyway, as always, link to the chapter of the fanfiction if you'd like to read along, and a link to my page if you want to check out the other stories that I've done. My other main one that I'm working on right now is Sonic High, which is just basically like a fan fiction about all the Sonic characters at high school and a bunch of drama that goes on with there. So, yeah, if you feel a bit adventurous, a bit frisky, a bit dirty, then maybe you want to go check that out. And if you're enjoying this, please leave a review on this story to let me know what you think, because they really mean a lot. And also, don't forget to favorite and follow, and I guess also subscribe now too, and like and comment and all those other things that people tell you to do that you're not obligated to do in any way. Anyway, this is a long chapter and I've been rambling, so let's get started. Chapter 7, Role Reversal. 2 years earlier. "Come along, son, we are going to be late," Tails' dad called, clutching his son's arm as he rushed through the crowded city streets. Bells chimed and music hummed through the air as the buzz of the yearly carnival rang out through the roads and alleyways of the central town square. The 13-year-old fox ran behind, struggling to keep pace with his father, who rushed through the streets. "Give us back our money!" a rat man hissed from the shadows. The rat leant down on all fours and began bounding toward the two, hot on their heels. "Dad, I can't keep up anymore," Tails whined. His father stopped and reached down, hoisting the young kit up over his shoulders in a fireman's carry, and broke out into a sprint. However, because of the immense extra weight that he now had to carry, his pace had slowed to no faster than a light jog. The rat man pounced, and Tails' father toppled to the ground. Tails was flung off of his shoulders and rolled across the cobblestone street, crashing into a nearby silver trash can. He watched in horror, tears beginning to pool in the back of his eyes, as the rat man reached into his father's jacket, wrenched out his wallet, and then pulled out a knife, stabbing Tails' father in the middle of his chest, blood oozing out quickly. "Dad!" Tails yelled. Oh, sorry about your ears, everyone. "Run home, son," his father whispered, barely clinging to life. He coughed up blood in between his short, shallow breaths. "I'll always love you." Tails, fear shrouding his entire being, jumped up and ran as fast as he could, not stopping until he flew into his house at the other end of town, crashing into his mother's comforting hug. The gloomy air fell back down, enveloping the town again in a veil of snow. Overnight the blizzards had picked up again, and now the town was engulfed in over a foot of snow. "At least it's Saturday," Sonic yawned to himself, stretching out his long, lanky blue arms. He reached over and pulled the covers close to his body, curling up in a ball to conserve the small amount of heat that he had. "Sonic, are you up?" his mother called from downstairs. Sonic couldn't be bothered to answer. He simply shut his eyes, trying to spur on sleep. He heard a faint knocking at the door. "Go away, Mom," he shouted, pulling the pillow and covering his head, plunging all his senses into darkness. He heard the door creak open and then close behind his mother. Sonic didn't want to look up. He knew his mother wanted him to set up the Christmas decorations today, and he was in no mood right now. Suddenly he froze as his blankets were lifted up and a small warm body slipped under the covers with him. Sonic turned over and stared, wide-eyed, as Tails had crept into the bed and snuggled up to Sonic without him knowing. Sonic shot up, diving out of the bed. "Tails, what are you doing?" he asked, mouth agape. Sorry, Tails began, hurt consuming his voice. "We snuggle on the bed all the time. I didn't know you weren't ready to go under the covers," he trailed off, staring at his lap. Sonic sighed loudly, making sure Tails could hear. "It's not because of that," he admitted. "What if Mum or Dad came in and saw us in bed together? You know the consequences." Tails simply smirked as a response. Sonic asked what was wrong, but after Tails said the magic words that echoed through Sonic's eardrums, he jumped back under the covers and gripped the young fox tightly. "Your parents went out to breakfast. They won't be back for 2 hours." The morning grew long as the sun fought against the dark clouds, both battling for dominance in the sky. The citizens of the town buzzed around as bustling cars and buses drove past the hedgehog's house. Children laughed, playing street hockey and tag, whilst all the cafes that lined the streets were filled to the brim with early birds pining over their piping hot cups of coffee. Everyone seemed to be up and about. Everyone, that is, except Tails and Sonic. The two snuggled up together. Tails was in a small ball, His tail was wrapped around himself while Sonic sat snug on the outside, his arms around the fox's middle. Their legs intertwined and Sonic rested his head on Tails' shoulder. I could lie here forever, Tails sighed, enjoying Sonic's warm breath on the back of his neck. Tails, can I ask you a question? Sonic said, nuzzling his head against the kid's neck. Anything. When did you first realize that you liked guys? That you liked me? Tails was taken a little aback by the sudden question, and upon seeing the confusion, Sonic decided to continue. I mean, you were the one who kissed me first. You said you had felt these feelings since summer. How did you contain your feelings for over 1.5 years ago without breaking down? When did you realize? Tails retorted, turning over and rested his head on his palm, which was lying against the pillow adjacent to Sonic. The kid stared into the emerald eyes of his companion and gave him an innocent stare. Sonic chuckled. Hey, bud, I asked you first, but okay, I'll start. I had been feeling closer and closer to you recently, and I don't know, after you kissed me I had to leave because it suddenly hit me all at once. All my feelings made sense. I couldn't hold it in any longer after that day. That's why I came to your house that night. So I need to know, when did you figure out your feelings for me, and how did you contain them for so long? Tails sighed. Sonic slipped his hand into Tails's, not minding the clamminess of his hands, and squeezed tightly, showing his support. Tails breathed deeply. Well, it all started on our camping trip we took back in July last year, the fox began, remembering back. It had been almost 3 months since Tails' dad was murdered in cold blood. His mother had completely broken down. She concealed herself in her room, only emerging to fix herself some meals. She had completely denounced her faith and no longer went to church. Every Sunday, Tails would head over to Sonic's house and go to church with his family. One Sunday, Sonic's mother smiled at the fox, who looked down at his fancy dress shoes, like he did every church. Tails, although coping better, still had a hard time with moving on, and if it wasn't for Sonic, he didn't know what he would do. Tails, honey, we're going on a camping trip next week. Would you like to join us? Sonic's mum whispered cheerfully. Tails glanced at Sonic, who smiled back, nodding calmly to the fox, trying to show that he really wanted his companion to join them. Thanks, he replied sheepishly. So, you loved me because you went to church with me? Sonic interrupted suddenly. No, I'm getting to that bit. It happened on the camping trip, Tails urged, trying to silence the hedgehog so he could continue his story. The trees rustled happily in the breeze, blocking out most of the sunlight. Small, thin streams of light managed to break through the canopy of foliage and bathed the cement road underneath its warm radiance. The silver car blasted by, carrying Sonic, Tails, and his mother. The car pulled up outside the gravel-covered car park in the middle of the dense, lush forest. Sonic's mother jumped out of the car happily and opened the boot. Honey, help me tack out the tents. Sonic nodded his head and jumped out of the car. He glanced back at Tails, noticing the fox had still not looked up from his lap. His smile faded as he trotted slowly to the boot. Listen to me, she whispered to her son. I took you two here because Tails needs our help. You're his best friend, and over this trip I want you to try to cheer him up. He needs to move on. Sonic looked up at his mother, about to ask more questions, but decided it would be best to just accept his mother's advice. He flashed the thumbs-up sign and ran to the back of the car. Come on, little buddy, he grinned. We need to go set up our tent. Tails sighed, slowly getting out of the car, rubbing away the tears with a clenched fist. Sonic grabbed his wrist, tent in the other hand, and sped off into the clearing of the forest, deciding where they would set up their tent. I'll be right here if you need me, his mother called as they disappeared out of sight. She smiled, pouring something hot from a thermos into a small red plastic cup and blew on it to cool the steaming beverage as she watched them leave. Sonic suddenly snapped out of the trance he was put in whilst listening to Tails' story. There was something about the way Tails told his story, each word floating down the stream that was coming from his mouth, dancing through the air until they penetrated his ear canals. They were each carefully selected and said with complete care. The knocking continued again, before the door began to creak open. Sonic suddenly pushed the fox out of bed with all of his strength. He collapsed on the floor, hurting his head. Sonic, we're home! Oh, and Tails, your mother wants you. Oh my chaos, are you okay? His mother cried out. She dashed over, completely unaware of the small, fox-shaped creases that were spread out on the bed. She rushed into the bathroom, bringing him a towel and holding it to the open wound on the fox's head. What happened? Tails looked at Sonic, shooting him daggers, his eyes full of hatred, but also pain. He understood why Sonic did what he had to do, but a little warning would have been nice. I just fell. It's really nothing, the kitsune smiled, thanking Sonic's mother for the towel, and left the house. I'll drive you home, she suggested, following Tails out of the house. Sonic, Dad wants to see you, she grimaced as she said this, but left the room anyway. Her words were filled with something Tails hadn't noticed before, something like fear. The day moved along at a slow pace. Tails hung out in his room, finishing his weekend homework early because he had nothing else to do. He wanted to spend his time with Sonic more than anything, but he knew he couldn't go back for the rest of the day. At least I have church with him tomorrow, he thought, smiling to himself. The phone buzzed in his pocket. Tails answered it eagerly, excitement filling inside of him, but when he heard the greeting on the other end, his heart faltered a bit. Oh, hi Blaze, how's it going? No, I'm not doing anything right now. You want to catch up later today? With me? Yeah, sure, I'd love to. The phone began to beep again. Hold on, Blaze, I'm getting another call. He put his feline friend on hold to answer the call. The voice on the other end line tried to greet Tails, but couldn't muster up enough breath to finish his sentence through his sobs and gasped. Sonic, is that you? Tails was taken completely aback. Sonic had never cried before, or at least not in front of anyone. Can I come over? Sonic pleaded, basically begging to his secret love. Of course, I'll always be here for you, Sonic murmured his thanks and hung up. Tails began to grow incredibly worried. Oh, Sonic, what happened? He said aloud. Please be okay. Please, He began to sob quietly to himself. Sonic was never sad. Ever. Something was horribly wrong. However, before he could finish his thoughts aloud, he heard more speaking into the phone. Tails? Are you still there? What happened to Sonic? Blaze continued, being put back on the phone after Sonic had hung up and heard Tails sigh out loud. This startled the young fox. Oh, yeah, sorry, Blaze. Sonic called me. Something is really wrong, and he needs to see me. Can I get a rain check? Blaze sat in her deep green armchair, face being illuminated by the dancing embers of the open fire that raged in her brick fireplace. She sighed into the phone before responding to the fox. Yeah, that's fine. I hope he's okay. We can always hang out some other time. See you later, Tails. She cheered goodbye and hung up. Blaze sighed, leaning back into her chair as her mind began to run wild with thoughts. Was Tails crying when Sonic was upset? Even for a best friend, that is a little much. Is there more between them? And what was he going to say before I interrupted him? It sounded like love. She immediately laughed at her thoughts. What an idiot, of course not. They are just good friends. She smiled to herself and scrolled through her smartphone and pressed on the contact labelled Silver. If she couldn't hang out with Tails, then maybe she could have a romantic movie night with her boyfriend. Ding dong! The doorbell rang a few moments later and Tails opened it, revealing a snivelling hedgehog, eyes red and puffy from all the many tears that had been shed. Is your mom home? He queried, but Tails shook his head. Sonic ran into the house, slamming the door behind him and buried his face into the soft white fur of Tails' stomach. Tails didn't know what to do. Normally things happen the other way around. He simply put his hand on Sonic's head and ran it through his quills, whispering niceties to the blue hedgehog to try to calm him down. Come upstairs, he started, thinking of how to help Sonic. It's cold down here. Sonic followed him upstairs, not letting go of the fox's hand. He slid into the bed next to the fox, hugging him tightly when they finally got comfortable under the sheets. It was then that he let the tears he had been holding back flow freely again. Tails noticed suddenly the purple bruise that sat on the side of Sonic's cheek. Surprised, he didn't notice it before. Tails touched it softly, rubbing his finger over it when Sonic yelped out in pain and swatted his hand away. Tails' eyes widened in shock. What happened? He asked. Dad was home. He was already drunk. He had just received my report card, and then he... Sonic burst into tears again. He didn't need to say any more. Tails knew the heinous act that Vector had committed. Nobody, not even the devil himself, should ever lay a finger on Sonic, he cursed to himself. He leant down and placed a small kiss on the bruised spot, but instead of yelping out in pain, Sonic squeezed Tails' hand tighter, thanking the fox for his kindness. Can you finish your story? He asked quietly. Tails simply nodded and finished his recounts of the moment that he realized he had fallen for the sapphire blur. The last remnants of the salmon-colored sky had been completely engulfed by the black darkness of the night, enveloping the forest and campsite. The nearby river at which the two boys collected their water for that night bubbled softly, glistening in the reflected moonlight onto their maroon-colored tent. A canopy of glistening stars broke through the never-ending blackness, flickering in and out of existence. Not one spot of the sky was visible as the vastness of the stars dotted the skyline due to the lack of artificial lights. The forest seemed to come to life in the night. Small bugs glowed brightly. Crickets chirped wildly into the night, now sung their soothing songs. The forest seemed oddly unfamiliar at night. The happy flowers and tall trees seemed to transform into more ominous versions of themselves. Tails pulled the head of his sleeping bag over his golden fur, covering his face from the outside world. Sonic took off his shoes and zipped up the entrance to the tent, blocking out the cool air of the outside world to keep the heat given off by the fox and hedgehog. Tails sniffed quietly when Sonic slipped into the warm embrace of his sleeping bag and turned over, watching the small body of Tails shaking somberly. Tails, come on, buddy, talk to me, Sonic began, placing his hand on the back of Tails' body. Tails decided to turn around and look at his friend. I know what happened is horrible, buddy, but you can get through this. There's so much to be happy for, so dry your tears, and I'll be here every step of the way, he smiled warmly. But I miss him so much. Tails sniffed again, trying to contain his tears. Sonic sighed, thinking of what to say next before he opened his mouth again. Tails, the day you lose somebody isn't the worst day of your life, because at least you have something to do. It's all the following days in which they stay dead. Tails thought about this, realizing how true the words the Hedgie spoke were. But you have me, and while I'm here, you will always have something to do, and will always have someone to be with. I'm never leaving you, buddy, because we are, and always will be, best friends. He smiled, showing his pearly white teeth. Something changed in the fox that night, something that he never wanted to happen, but felt oddly right. Suddenly, Sonic's eyes seemed to change. They were no longer just emerald-tinted eyes, they were more. The colour, only yesterday just seemed like a normal green, had somehow changed to show sympathetic pulls, expelling care and deep-seated emotions. The blue fur covering his body seemed to dance through his mind. They say that love is in the eyes of the beholder, and suddenly this was true for Tails. He could feel his cheeks begin to flood with crimson, and the sadness that had enveloped the fox's entire being for almost 2 months seemed to be completely replaced by his new feeling of love. Suddenly, Tails realized what was happening. He quickly turned over, shielding his features from the outside world. He couldn't let Sonic know about his feelings. Not now, not ever. Nobody could know. If anybody found out, he would be an outcast and never have a normal life. It simply wasn't allowed. Thanks, Tails whispered, not glancing back. Sonic shuffled over, wrapping his arms around the kit's body, still cocooned in the warm fabric. Tails, however, didn't stop his friend. He simply lay there, letting his friend comfort him with his warming hug, and let the love wash over him, filling him on the inside completely, like water consuming the inside of a glass. Tails knew this wasn't healthy, but never thought that the love he felt would eventually consume him and overwhelm him, but it was still one of the best moments of his life. Always, Sonic whispered, laying his head on the fox's shoulder and closing his eyes. This was the first of many times the two would sleep together. That was a good night, Sonic sighed, having calmed down now after listening to his love's words. I wish you had told me earlier. Me too, Tails confessed, snuggling closer to Sonic's body. Me too. And that's the end of Sontails' Dreams Come True Chapter 7. Thank you so much for listening along, and hopefully you read along too. And don't forget to leave what you think in either a comment on this video, or if you want, I'd be much appreciated, go leave a review on the thing as well. And if you click follow or favorite, then you'll be updated when the next time the stories come out, because my read-throughs are always about 5 chapters behind. So yeah, thank you all for listening, and until next time, stay safe, I guess. See you later, everybody.